company retreat, but still, like, getting everybody sick.
Yeah, that's Kristen's, her sister's office, like the
Okay, we're going to call to order the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee meeting. We have various council members and mayor, lay committee members, the fire chief, the police chief, and we have more committee members and one council member on the meeting as well. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This has been a process to get to this particular meeting. I just kind of want to go through what's happened over the last 6 months. So we had our last meeting in April, and after that, we had scheduled the 2 chiefs and the service director scheduled a total of 6 tours. And I want to thank them very much for doing that. It took a lot of coordination between the other communities, our departments, and our committee here. We had excellent tours. Each tour was a minimum of 2 hours. The respective other cities gave us so much of their time, and it was extremely helpful. There were 3 council members who attended every tour. A couple other council members came to a few of them, and we had various lay committee members as well that came to some of the tours. We are at the point now where we want to go through what we learned in those tours. Myself and Councilman Rock sat with both chiefs and the service director individually, go over what we learned in those tours and what research we have done within those 6 months. One thing I also want to mention is that we had very good discussion with lay committee members that had emailed ideas and updates after they also went on the tours, which all 3 directors thought about when they were making some adjustments. We at this point are going to finalize the assessment hopefully tonight after some discussion, where then GPD can update the building square footages, and we can go on, but I'll talk about next steps for the end of the meeting. As I said before, Councilman Rock and I did invite the mayor to all of these meetings, sat with all 3 directors. They on their own presented their updates. There was no initial input from myself or Councilman Rock before the meeting, and there were very few slight adjustments after those meetings, and that is what is included in the packet tonight. There were significant square footage changes. I also, which we'll talk about after we go through these updated square footage assessments, I spoke to our finance director to talk about what we have now in terms of cash flow for this project and what the future financing pieces would look like. So I want to start off by first going through our packet. We first have the service department. If everyone can, that's the first packet in the pile of materials. There was very little change in the service department square footage. I think a total of maybe 4,000 square feet, give or take. We have a possible site. I know in our last meeting, we asked the mayor to try and get something formalized with Wiley to see if we can use that footprint. There is a mock-up drawing already, which we do have. The service director has a copy as well, and he agrees with what that footprint looks like, and it matches the square footage in here. So there was very little, like I said, that was adjusted. And Mr. Rock, if you want to.
Yeah, I could just mention that when we sat down with the service director, I've never done a service department before, so I wasn't exactly sure the space requirements that we needed for the city for our existing building and for the 2 facilities that he sent us to. So we're kind of working with, best practice of the public cities we saw versus what we're up against. As of right now, our garbage truck fleet sits outside. It really should be indoors. The diesel engines need to be warmed up ahead of their run. So either someone has to come to work now early, or we have to have garage space. That's something I think we've all recognized that is important. Those are very expensive vehicles. The one component of the service department that is still kind of in flux is the salt storage zone. UPD's recommendation was stored for 2,000 tons of salt. As of right now, we do use Cleveland Heights Salt Dome. We have a facility here on campus at the City Hall campus that could hold salt for about 1 snowstorm. And once that's depleted, it has to be refilled after each storm. So one thing we did talk about internally was maybe reducing that to 1,000 tons needed for salt storage. But the service director didn't think 2,000 was required. 2,000 would be required if we were to fill it up one time in the winter. But as there is not currently a salt shortage, there only have been once in the last 10 years. It may not be necessary to build that capacity. One could probably get away with that at half the cost. That's one thing that is still kind of a question mark. Outside of that, we did look at vehicle storage. I think the number with EPD is on target with the fleet that we have. So we looked at all of the pieces of equipment, vehicles that we have, and we wanted to make sure if we can get them all under a roof, what size footprint would that be, using a like I said, double loaded. If you think of a double loaded corridor, but you have an aisleway that can load diagonally on either end. That seems to fit the equipment and vehicles that we had currently in our fleet. And then really the only change is decreasing the size of the vehicle maintenance area. We decreased that. We did have one item to the service department.
Nope, already did it. You and Kevin have your office.
Please mute themselves.
Already.
So we were going to add the uniform storage. All of our service workers have uniforms that are laundered and provided by Cintas, and so there needs to be a place
What are you talking about?
for their working shift. Other than that, really all we've done was with this particular department was to get the rooms in line with the other rooms throughout the campus, like the director's office side, assistant director. We're trying to keep that consistent. But for the most part, this had probably the smallest reduction of square footage, but it still amounts to about 3 times the size of what we have currently. However, what we have currently, we don't have overhead or garage space for all of our garbage fleets. So there would be this increase in some.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rack. So just before we take comments on this piece, this was definitely the one department where the least change was made. As Mr. Rack said, vehicle maintenance was, again, with Mr. Corney's input, was lower the most. And then there's really the question of the salt dome. And we do have the footprint of where this should go. And it's hopefully just awaiting that signed contract with Wiley here. Before we go on, are there any comments or questions with this service department?
Hi, Michelle. The reduction in square footage I see as cut in half. Is that comparable to other cities for their, if they store salt? Is that comparable to the square footage and the tons that are used?
You're talking about the salt dome or the vehicle maintenance piece?
The salt dome.
So we actually had a lengthy discussion with Mr. Corney about this. It is in flux still. He does feel though that 1,000 tons would be appropriate. However, we are flexible on this amount when it comes, when we start digging deeper in this.
And that amount, Mr. Cooney, is represents one replenishment throughout the winter.
Yeah.
So we require 2,000 tons of salt for the year. As you know, right now we store it at Cleveland Heights. Actually, Baker Heights has even offered to store our salt if we have a problem with Cleveland Heights. So there's still a backup option if Cleveland Heights ever terminates our contract. There's still a backup with Baker Heights, but obviously the salt dome we have today is not adequate. It's only enough for one storm. So we do understand we need something local for at least two or more storms.
And the one other comment just to that point is We don't know if it's even possible on the footprint at Wiley right now to have a large drone. It was really tight as it was. So once we get more detailed into the development of this, we would know better.
Yeah, would there, and this is probably too early in the conversation for that, but would there be any county requirements in regards to containment of the, for runoff from the salt though? Because would there be, I mean, it's salt that technically goes on the ground to begin with, but would there be any requirements in regards to materials and runoff and containment? So it doesn't impact the areas.
Yeah, Mr. Picorni is not here right now. I don't know if the mayor knows, but I mean, we have a salt dome right now. It's on cement. So I'm not sure we would, I think we have to wait and see if there's any something specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I know this is like pretty early to even say that, but just, I was just curious, just thinking regards to that.
No, thank you. Hi, we have another question from one of the committee members.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Is this under the assumption that this is a freestanding standalone service department,
Yes,
free of like police department?
Yes.
fire station?
yes.
Right?
Yes, and at this point, we have tentative agreement with the school board that we could use land here at Wiley. That was part of the deal we were negotiating bus depot here, so it is possible, and we've had our engineer take a look at whether a service department can fit. It does, which would be great because it would take that service area away from the neighborhood, right now it sits right off of Saybrook and Silsby there, and trash is smelly, leaves are smelly. So to have that away from the houses would be ideal. Additionally, it's something that can happen separate from the rest of the building. It can happen really at any time as soon as we have an agreement. So, when money is available and the schedules allow, that's something that could happen concurrently or separate.
Does that also include like the vehicle garage?
Yes,
Everything.
there's actually a drawing, initial drawing of what that footprint would look like.
That's, I haven't seen it in this.
I can email that over to the committee after. I actually,
And that was the same.
I have it here also, if you need it. We could take a look after. And I guess I just want to ask the mayor, has anything occurred with Wiley in terms of signing any agreement?
There's nothing new to report that you aren't already aware, that they are generally amenable to doing that, and our council, their council and our council still need to hammer in with the details.
One thing I would like to mention, because it's the freestanding building separate from the rest of campus, it would require some duplication of space. Like that's the break room, that's the
Where I was going.
Yeah,
yeah.
they actually need the least amount of office space. So, they obviously need a break room, a kitchenette, a couple of offices, but they would be a standalone. We'd have to duplicate some. Kind of a segue from that is, before we get into police and fire, after sitting with the directors, the idea, and obviously this can change, nothing is set in stone until you actually start getting into more of the nitty-gritty details, is that the service department would hopefully move to Wiley, which frees up that whole area in that current space. It's public record that we filed eminent domain to purchase the Yavi property. Hopefully there won't be any issues and we would obtain that. The Yavi property and the current police station would become the fire station, because now they have access to Warrensville Center Road. They wouldn't have that crazy turn from where they're currently located. The police station would then go where the whole service yard is and back, because we own many homes. Some which are standing and some which are knocked down. So we have property and we have homes there, like where the building department is. And then we're going to talk about City Hall at the end, But the idea was, after speaking to all the directors, is to keep the city hall, at least the facade, and make the entire city hall piece, the city hall and the fire department, all, the fire department would become, current fire department would become part of city hall, and you would have a lot more space, you'd even have ground access. That was what we discussed with the directors. And it also keeps kind of the integrity of the uniqueness of the city hall building, at least the front of it. Which some committee members have, and council members.
No,
The shell,
we can
yeah.
do anything with the interior, but yeah, the envelope. Unique to the city, I want to say it's historic, but it's an old building. Unique to the city and something we want to see remain, to remove the building, we would still have to do a special abatement, so you have to do that whether you're knocking down the building or renovating it, so that there. You know, the efforts to get it, the 21st century would have similar efforts of knocking it. Price could make sense to keep it, but certainly there's importance to it, why we want to keep it. But it doesn't have to be the city hall, be anything, the public space, the whatever, but actual footprint of it, the envelope, then I'd like to see in some capacity.
Are there any
May
other
I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Who is up? Who's talking right now?
Paul Simborski, it's a long ways off, but before we just settle on salt, salt's so corrosive, salt destroys our roads, salt destroys our cars. There's alternatives to salt, beet juice and sand and calcium, magnesium. So I'm just hoping in the future we can look at those kind of things. Youngstown State University, Akron University have programs in corrosion engineering. And I don't know what's effective financially, but I just hope we can be more progressive than just assuming we're going to throw more salt on the roads and destroy our roads as much as we do and then have to repave them. So just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, and that's duly
Yep.
noted. That's why we have the committee members here to make those kinds of comments, and, you know, sustainability is something that the mayor has, you know, made a point of discussing in our city and making strides for that. So hopefully that will be. Are there any other comments? Okay. If you turn to the fire concept space list. So in police and fire, there were many changes. And again, the directors are the ones that led the charge in terms of how the square footage should look after our tours. And they really, all three directors really worked extremely hard on their own time to adjust this. They know what the financial constraints are and what the space constraints are. And I personally commend them. They've done an excellent job. We can go line by line. I think though, you know, this was sent out a couple of weeks ago already. We can talk about some of the highlights on what some changes were from the original plans. There were a few things that were very unique to fire once we started the tours. One thing that really stuck out when I went on the tour was they had a triage room as soon as you enter the fire station. The fire chief has said, and the police chief, in fact, also, unwell and injured people come to the stations all the time, which I was never aware of. So this is right in the front. You don't have to walk through the building to get to it. They have proper facilities to treat these people or to transport them right away. And that was something that everyone that went on the tour thought was something that was definitely needed. There were spaces that were definitely shrunk because the fire chief felt that they were needed, and there were some things that were combined. For instance, like training rooms.
Right, so we could find a training room with,
A contract. It's
It's
I had it.
training, 4.0 is third line. The first conference, it says 1,200 there, and then with training.
Oh, and yeah, it's under 4.0 training. It was a shared,
Oh, it's
So-
emergency operations.
Yeah,
Center. So that
exactly.
if there's an emergency, maybe we don't need a dedicated emergency operations center, they could use the flexible conference, which is pretty large, 1,200 square feet.
another point, did you want to say anything else about
Well, I
training?
was gonna say there are a few things that we reduced, notably the apparatus bay. UTD had proposed 6 days for our fleet. We felt that this could be reduced to 4. Right now, we have 3 apparatus bays, where we have one for each fire truck and one for the 2 ambulances that are in tandem parking. We looked at maybe doing 4 different bays, different sizes, so that training can also happen within the bay. We also looked at the living quarters. So as we went through our tours, one thing that's notable about the fire department is that the workers live there. They're 24 hours on their shift. They have a dormitory room, they have restrooms and living spaces. So one thing that we looked at were the particular living spaces and how that could come together. We reduced some of the numbers, so where there's a quantity in that middle column, if we see something that's struck out with a new number, it's a change to the quantity. We reduced the number of private restrooms, reduced the number of individual dormitories, with consultation with the fire chief.
One thing that also was very important was training. And what all of the fire stations that we toured had were these towers and the staircases. If you think of, just a regular office building, the staircases are just one space, but what they do in the fire departments is they actually train. They make the stairs almost like a tower, so they can down, windows there, they have hooks there. So there's not one piece of space in the fire department that is unused.
And that's the fire, it's like a fire stair. So
Right.
instead of being a generic fire stair, training, so they could propel down the steps, or they even had openings at the outside where they could hook up their line and same thing, propel down the back of the wall. But you're using existing space that's needed for the building anyway. You have that fire stair. So why not use it for programmatic items?
And another, something just to note in the fire department is that, yes, there were some offices that were combined, some were downsized, but there was also things that were increased after our conversations. So, if you look at supplies, if you look at, we actually increased the tower, we actually increased conference room because it's to be shared by other tasks. So, this was really a holistic look at the entire square footage here. So, the fire chief was happy with those results. I noted here with a total square footage of the fire department. So you have that.
And I have the total.
I thought I had it.
Perfect. You remember the total you came up with?
That was-
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, so 24,000. Are there any questions with fire department?
So that represents a 25% reduction from the
25%?
25%.
I'm sorry, did you mention the square footage of the existing fire department versus the proposed?
Chief, what's the existing square footage? Again? No, what we have right now,
Which you
2,600 square feet,
you have how many square feet now on fire?
3,600,
3,600?
4,600.
That include the apparatus?
Yeah, it doesn't include a lot of like the little garages and the administrative house.
I'm sorry, was the number 4,600?
4,600, which is fully inadequate.
Just the main. Yeah, and this is more, we have some program outside of the building, so fire prevention, that we rent space. It's back to the. It's
No, they
not at
moved.
the annex anymore, is it?
Yeah, they moved back.
They moved. So I'm sorry, what's excluded from that 4,600?
This garage.
Fitness garage,
Garage next to the station. Residential.
which is for,
Fire prevention.
that's fire prevention.
Storage.
Okay, so it could be that it's possibly 6,000.
I just think it would be good by department to show what is existing and what is proposed. So we could, eventually, you're going to have that argument or discussion, what's being asked for. You know, how, is it doubling, is it tripling? And I think that's just a good barometer. I would also just encourage the group to think about, you know, when they, next time, whatever this happens, that we grade the program as to what they must have and what they would like to have. Maybe that's not appropriate anymore. But I'm often faced with that. What must you have and what are the extras you would like to have? Because this all comes down to taxpayers eventually having to support this.
Exactly, and that's, that is the meeting that we had, before this committee meeting, so, we could kind of head that off. That what you're seeing right now are, first of all, it happens to be greatly reduced from the original concept space, but these are not wish lists anymore. These are, I need this, we can't work without it. So this is that version.
I'm extraordinarily impressed with the chiefs really sharpening their pencils in order to, you know, create something that will serve them best, serve the city best, and yet be right-sized and be financially responsible. And it was great job. I applaud them.
Excuse me, Michelle.
Okay, sure. Chris?
Thank you. I'm looking at the, I have a question. So for the restrooms, as an example, in the administration, there's 2, along with the other restrooms or showers noted in the living quarters and the like the emergency operations center. Would all of those be gender neutral? If so, it's only noted in the living quarters section 2. Or would it be men and women in the other areas? And gender neutral only in the living quarters?
Second section 100, it says restrooms or quantity 2, so it appears from the study here that those were designated men and women's. We reduced the size to 55 square feet that to become 2 individual gender neutral stalls as opposed to larger restrooms. This is really for like the administration, the waiting area, but the individual dormitory restrooms, the general practice was to make those gender neutral. Those were private restrooms, private shower.
Yeah.
And for the in the living quarters section for locker room, it says 30 people. The square footage was originally listed at 1,000. It looks like it's been reduced at 400. Would that still be able to accommodate 30 people, or would that number be reduced?
Actually, I think what we did with that, and Chief, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, the locker rooms, we combined that with the dormitory, correct? Where we would have space in front of each room with 3 lockers by shift, A shift, B shift, C shift, as opposed to a dedicated locker room. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the elimination of a traditional style locker room with showers, will desire to be transferring over to that individualized larger restroom.
So you might not have heard that, Mr. Cooney, on microphone, but what we were looking at was there are 10 dormitory rooms, and if we could have like a little alcove as soon as you come off the corridor, before you go into the individual dormitory room, to have a 40 square foot space that would have 3 lockers in it, one for A50 to C shift, okay? And so that could be a private space, but you have your dedicated locker within your dormitory area. So I think that's where the 400 came from, we were multiplying that by the 10 room.
And if anyone did not go to the tours for the fire department, what they have is within each dormitory room, there are 3 lockers. So even within the bedroom, there are A shift, B shift, and C shift. So all of the space is really used efficiently. And the chief put a lot of thought into this because he really reconfigured a lot of different areas.
And the difference is, this being right outside of the room, is that there's shift changing. You know, who has ownership of that bedroom? It can still be closed off, and you can still use the locker in front of that room within its own alcove separate, so that 2 people can still use that space at the same time. But the tours we took, when those lockers were in the bedroom, then really you only have privacy for 1 person, so that should be interesting. This lend itself to a little flexibility.
And just one more note, well, I guess first of all, does anybody else have any comments or questions? So just one other note, to just discuss the fire department is what we do not have right now, are any type of rooms off the bays, which are extremely important. And these are really necessities. There are decontamination rooms, there are, supply rooms, there are EMT equipment rooms and drying rooms. There's just a laundry list of very specific rooms that are needed within those bays. And that is something, if you've ever toured our fire department, we are, one of the main things that we're lacking.
And one thing to note, while there's 2 laundry rooms proposed, one is for uniform, there's no that could stay in its own laundry facility, and then there's one proposed for the living quarter. Your regular laundry, it's not mixed with that. That's covered.
Okay, before I move to the police department, are there any more comments or questions? Okay. So, 2 things to note before we talk about some things in the police department is, there is no shooting range on here. There are very few shooting ranges, in the area, and, that space is not needed. The chief was comfortable with going, once a month or whatever to whatever, arrangements that we have right now. There's no covered garages, which obviously is a luxury, but we do not have the space for that at this point. And there's no full jail or no build out of a full jail. Every police department that we went to said you definitely need holding cells, but no one in new construction are building jails. And in fact, there was one city that we went to that they're using it as a training facility right now, because everybody has their regional jails that they're going to right now.
To piggyback on that, if we were to do a 12-day jail, we would have to have with dispatch back in-house, because these rooms require 24-hour operation, and with dispatch, you would have that 24-hour coverage. Right now, we have joint dispatch with other cities, but we don't have a person who can oversee a 12-day jail.
The other thing to note is the police chief was very conscious of not duplicating spaces and using spaces efficiently in terms of shared spaces for whether it's training or whether it's roll call or things like that. Also, the one thing to note, which we are sorely lacking right now, are evidence. What's the correct terminology? Yeah. So not just within the police facility, but also within the Bay Area. Sometimes things come in that you do not want inside the actual building, so you need storage for evidence there, as well as inside. Just some other. Just looking at some other highlights here. Again, there were some things that were decreased, there were things that were increased as well. Chief Rogers, how much square footage is the current facility? Sure.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. The current facility is about 4,500 square feet. That does not include garage space that we use in other areas of municipal campus. It doesn't include the detective bureau house and Sable. So
it could be maybe 6,500, some approximately.
I believe all those figures were in the assessment as well.
Yeah, in the big one.
Just a few comments if I'm up here. If I can.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Just before you start commenting, and the current and the total square footage now that. I have it. You have that offhand with the current revised one is?
So in September, the conceptually scaled station numbers that sent to all elected officials and the lake committee acknowledged a reduction from 26,859 square feet to 16,116 square feet. And as you indicated, from some of the feedback that I got from committee members, elected officials from the spring meeting and then subsequent facility tours, this scaled list does not acknowledge a range 12-day jail, dispatch center built out, or EOC center, and entire fleet covered park. So again, we reviewed some of these line by line previously in December. There is one issue at Councilperson Rock we did discuss in the email that there was a space that wasn't accounted for in the notes.
Right, that has back there.
5.02. That would be more for an oversized space after reduction of other spaces or eliminating other spaces, but an oversized space for roll call, classroom training, large conferencing, and department events in 5.02. And with that being said, again, some spaces were just eliminated based on feedback that I got through this process. They were merged, some were just reduced, and others were increased to accommodate the elimination of other spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief.
The one space where I would like to see some co-location, but at this point I showed it as separate. Police having their own, fire having their own, is the fitness space. Obviously, in terms of cost and ties, it would be great to co-locate the two departments so we have one fitness space. But we've heard from the chiefs as to why those should be separated. If you could maybe elaborate on that a little more of why those should be separated.
Sure. So just for law enforcement personnel, we have sworn duty and obligations that extends beyond just when we're on duty. We have authority that goes with us when we're off duty, when we're out of the city, depending on a certain crime that could be committed in progress. So we have policy, we have expectations that officers are permitted to carry firearms off duty and to take law enforcement action when necessary. And that would also include when they would have to leave our station, our secure facility to go work out in a shared environment. Our officers would be expected, because it's policy to carry firearms with them. Going in a shared space that doesn't have really accommodating that because it's not hardware within our own facility that creates some unique circumstances when that happens. And it's really with physical fitness, and this is well known common, but it really impacts their physical and mental well-being. It's nice for them to be able to just let their guard down as well. They're in our station, secure walls. They don't have to walk around. Any police equipment or radio with them, they can really let their guard down. Work out, enhancing fitness and physical and mental well-being within our facilities. And also as proposed, and part of what I combined for certain spaces, would be for the physical fitness group will also be, part of it with equipment for working out, but the other part would be practical training applications. On one side of the room would have things like wrestling mats and pads on the wall where we can do our annual and recurring training specific to the use of force or impact weapons or less lethal tools that we have to use or simulation training. Things like that, we can use that shared space when needed.
Thank you. And, this is why it's so important to have these conversations, because that wouldn't occur to, maybe some of the lay committee members or the council members that you can't share the fitness area, but once you explained it, it made perfect sense. So, and that's also why the tours were so important. Sometimes you just have to see some things and actually hear it from those different cities, why they have what they have. Are there any other comments from any committee members or council members? Okay, and just to note, this is a 40% reduction from the original investment. So now, what's not in your packet, because it's very difficult to assess. I did ask for a meeting with the mayor, the directors, and Mr. Rock. The mayor did not want to meet. He wanted to discuss it here, which is fine. But it would have, I would have liked to discuss it beforehand, just as a courtesy, so we can kind of update him what we were doing so far, because he didn't attend any of the tours or the directors meetings, but now we have City Hall. So when the directors and I were speaking along with Mr. Rock, and we actually, some of the lay committee members and council members that went on the tours also heard that there was kind of a overall suggestion of let's keep City Hall where it is. Combine the current City Hall building with the fire station and make that into the City Hall. So you have the same corner footprint, because frankly, there's no other space for City Hall. That's really what we're up against right now. And you have the whole, you could have the Bay Area, could be a very large conference area / council chambers, or, I mean, there's a lot of different ideas that could be had. But we don't really, that whole area would need to be looked at once we start going into more development. What are some thoughts on that, mayor and committee members?
I think that's something we look at in the design phase.
Well, in terms of programming and the actual space needs, there's some square footage we have to figure out ahead of it. I like the idea of repurposing City Hall, repurposing the existing fire to be incorporated as part of the City Hall. The existing fire station, as you guys are aware, you have your apparatus bays, it's just an open garage space with living quarters above. Living quarters above can turn into offices, you turn into any kind of administrative space. Most importantly, City Hall needs to be accessible. Right now, it isn't. We have a chairlift that barely works, but it's part of this overall rebuilding of campus. We want to make sure floor lines line up with something. You have an elevator bank nearby on the same floor line. What we were looking at in terms of space need, or all of the things on the conceptual space list, something that we need to have. You need 2 auditoriums. I would argue you don't. Duplication of spaces like conference room, kitchenettes, that sort of thing. How do you consolidate those so that one copy room for all administration or per floor? Those are things that we really need to iron out at this phase before we move on to hiring an architect during the design phase. So one other thing we looked at was the in terms of square footages was getting the spaces to align with all the departments so that every director has the same square foot office, every assistant director has the same size square foot office. We want to keep that consistent across the board. Again, we just want to look at these additional spaces like large meeting rooms. We would like to have public space. It's just a matter of size and whether it's an auditorium or just a flexible space with flexible seating, that's something we really need to consider. Auditoriums or fixed seating. But there's multiple departments too, you know, you have building, economic development, community, housing and community development, finance. All of these departments are housed within the city hall. So those are just really, their offices, there's conference rooms, there's workspace. But there's the component that's missing in our current city hall community space. So that's something we really needed. Again, at this juncture.
That's very well, that was very well said. You know, in the design phase, if it's decided, and I think at this point, there is no other space to put City Hall. If we combine the fire station with the current City Hall, that is the square footage that we have. So that's how the design would have to be, you know, thought about. This is, you know, X amount of square foot. How can we make the most out of this for our community space in our offices?
And then in terms of phasing, in terms of priority, I would put City Hall for phasing. It's very important that we get our police and fire into their new facility as quickly as possible. We have they're very small spaces, they're tight, they have inability to recruit people because of the spaces that they have. It's important that in terms of projecting this out, phasing those two departments. And it could be the services first, because that could be mutually exclusive. It could happen concurrently or it can happen separately. So in terms of priority, I almost weigh the City Hall towards the bottom because it's important that we get police and fire as soon as possible.
It was actually the next thing that I was going to talk about is phasing. When we were talking to the directors, it seemed fire is the hardest department to find swing space for because they live there, right? So the idea was, and again, this has to be talked about, you know, once we hire our, you know, the owner's rep and architect and engineer, well, you would move service out, right? So service would start being built. And if you can get the, you know, Yavi and the police station, you could have fire service. I'm sorry, you could have fire service and police actually built at one. And then City Hall would be the last piece though. The hardest, obviously, and this is how, you know, the owner's job is to try and help find the swing space also. It's not going to be easy to find police. You know, there's things that are going to have to be set up in that meantime, but you know, fire would be moved out when their new fire station is built. Service department's biggest issue is parking for all of those vehicles. You know, there definitely is right now some parking, you know, maybe University Square and things like that. The park where things are already being parked. You know, these are things that we have to talk about further down the line, but the idea was to have fire, police and service built and then move City Hall out at the end. Now, in terms of financing, I did speak to Mr. Kennedy. I wanted to speak to the mayor beforehand also, but he did not want that meeting. So this is, it's an interesting thing where we are holding right now in terms of our finances. So we actually, 2 years ago, started putting money away for facilities. We were putting $100,000 away a year. We have a bond now that dropped off, which was $230,000, which will now also be starting to be put into that facilities account. So to date, we have $430,000 in our facilities account. Plus, we had a surplus this year, and in our investments, while keeping our prudent reserve, those two things combined, not touching the prudent reserve, which is about a 15%, we have $4 million of unrestricted funds. So we have $4.5 million right now that we definitely do not have to finance, which is excellent news. The other piece of information is that we would hope that this project would only cost $20 million. That is what, after speaking to the finance director, we could reasonably assume to pay off without raising any taxes to our residents, which we do not want to. So that is the assumption that we have to go under. $20 million would be the budget. And that number, you know, obviously would get refined once we move on to the next steps.
And with project cost or construction? That 20.
That was everything.
That's
As a
project.
problem.
Okay, so
What was that, project or construction? The 20
project cost.
project, so take 20%, 80% of that should be construction and 20% or something another for soft costs, for construction costs. So probably 16 million construction.
Remember, we have $4.5 million cash right now.
I understand. I think it's just important, and I'm glad someone asked the question because I wrote it about project costs versus construction costs, which all translates to square footage, total square footage and what we can afford.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I did want at the appropriate time just to speak in defense of saving the city hall, and when that's appropriate, let me know.
Sure. I think, you know, what we've discussed right now is actually trying to save City Hall. That's what, you know, that was what we discussed. I want to open it up to comments and, you know, what other people think. So Paul, if you want to.
Sure. We have so few historic buildings, and I'm glad, and I've talked to people before about saving City Hall. There's nothing wrong with density. Our University Heights is 1.8 square miles. Lyndhurst is 4.4 square miles. Beechwood 5.27. We all have the same population. I think density is beautiful. It makes us a walking community. We have few historic buildings in University Heights. In 1966, I think it was Lyndon Johnson who passed the National Historic Preservation Act. And I take it, you know, I think it's something we should keep in mind. I've talked about this before, and I don't know if it's a vehicle, Ari might know better, to be used, but could we ever, find a way to use historic tax credits, even if we repurposed City Hall and took it off the balance sheet? I just think it's something to look at. I also think designers too often only design in two dimensions, and they don't look at the third dimension. What I mean about that is the basement and the third floor. And I understand the program of the fire department, but could the firing range, and maybe it's already been thought about, be in a basement, and could housing be on the third floor? Again, I just hope when we plan, we're a dense suburb. We don't need to take more houses off the tax roll if we don't have to. And if we could plan in the third dimension as well, I would just encourage us to do that. That's all I have.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting what you said about historical tax credits. So I actually, in my first year as a council member, looked into that. I was actually taking a course where we were discussing it, and the City Hall is not eligible for that, unfortunately. I looked into it.
The way you currently.
Yeah, pretty in depth.
So there's certainly loopholes, and my firm does a lot of historic preservation work, and I brought this to our historic department and asked them what they thought, and University Heights, City of University Heights would not it did not own the building. Let's say we gave it to a developer, we still own the land, but we have a developer own the building. They can qualify for historic tax credits, which could bring the construction costs down. And we would at least back to them. So if there are ways to qualify, it would just take University Heights out of that sequence, or out of that equation, so that a for-profit developer could take advantage of that. And if that's the case, if you have a developer involved in that, you know, what other programmatic items can we add to offset our costs? You know, we talked about mixed use developer, we have the land available, you know, is that a way to get more density onto the site, and while reducing our individual costs? So that's something that we could look at.
And I guess, finally, before we open up to comments and questions again, is if the mayor can get, GPD to make a final assessment with all of our changes here, and I know that this group would be happy to sit with them also for any clarifying questions, or the directors themselves, I'm sure would be happy to. If we could get that done quickly, and then start that process of figuring out the financing, because as everyone knows, the rates are constantly changing right now, so we have to be very intentional and thoughtful about how we finance this project, and start bidding out the owner's rep and the architects and the engineers. This project could really have a shovel in the ground in 18 months.
So with that said, we do need an owner's rep. The GPD assessment lists owner's rep at 3% of construction costs. It seems high for me. I've seen like 1.5%. So perhaps we start there. But what I would like to do is put out an RFQ for owner's rep. And we have a committee here of experts who understand that. You're involved in RFQs, you're involved in interview processes, and I'd like to see even this committee be part of the selected committee for the owner's rep. Council will have to ultimately approve who that owner's rep is, but we can't do that without the advice of our lay members here. So that's something I'd like to see you have an active role in this process. Does that make sense? Be part of the select team.
I'd be happy to, John. I know if you're asking this committee, I know, I'll give you a range of names of owners reps we've worked with. I know of.
Okay, so you know, there's no architect on the payroll right now. So there's no one that really understands the process. So this is something, which is why we need an owner's rep to get out this process. But to get to the right one, that's where we're going to lean on you guys for your expertise. So we're going to have to prepare an RFQ. We're going to have an interview process, and we need people who can evaluate this.
So Mayor, are you comfortable with this committee starting an RFQ process for an owner's rep?
No, I have asked repeatedly for a written report of the findings you've been presenting. I asked for this in December. I asked for this before we would have a meeting. We're having this meeting now. We are taking this all out.
Can you please explain that further?
We're taking this all out of order.
What's out of order?
Well, I don't have a writing here of all these changes that you're making.
So
You need a copy?
I have the things that you've written.
Yeah.
You know, as far as, you know, things that you've taken a blue pen to and crossed out on various items here on GPD's report. But I don't have any kind of written report from you with regard to what it is you're actually trying to do here.
So we're not preparing a written report. Our job is to review the work of the engineer who prepared the study and provide our markups that he can finalize the report. We understand there is a no charge what adjustment that will be made with our markups.
I don't believe that's the case.
well,
Go ahead.
GPD was scheduled to be here and then all of a sudden canceled. So the goal of this meeting was, here are the changes. Which all the directors are comfortable. And GPD now has to finalize the assessment based on these changes. That was the goal of the next step before the RFQ. Now you have the changes. You need to speak to GPD to make the final assessment, and then we can start the RFQ process.
GPD finalized in January.
No, they did not.
And they even specifically said this is not a final report after I asked. And you guys were in the room.
Well, I understand they fulfill the scope of their responsibilities that we contract.
They did not. This is not a complete report. We have more changes, and they said on the record,
Yeah.
they would incorporate these changes into the file.
Well, I'm happy to review where you can show me in the scope of services that they contracted, where they.
I have on the record.
They verbally
They
stated.
verbally stated in this meeting, in front of this committee, that their work is not complete, and when we provide our markups, they will complete the study.
Okay, well, again, if we refer to the contract, if you can show me where in the contract. they're
Mayor, why would you,
responsible for doing it.
why would
Yeah,
you
what
want
do you
to stop
have
this process? Your directors are the ones who made the changes.
I don't.
It wasn't. me.
I think there's a misunderstanding of where we are. We have a final report from GE.
We do not have a final
We
report.
have changes that you would like to make, which are appropriate. And, I've spoken with the directors to some extent, but I've been waiting to get a more final form with regard to what it is you were proposing.
So
I
what
mean,
we're
it makes
proposing,
sense. Can I finish? Yeah, I think. So we have a final report from GPD. They issued in June of last year. You have now time where you're making changes based upon what we believe we can afford and other factors that we find desirable. You spend some time with our directors, you've toured some of the facilities. It's all very good, but need to have from you what your next proposal is with regard to what we're doing. GPD has issued their report.
so I would just like to state, it was on the record, Joe Cheney spoke at this microphone here and stated that this is not a final report, that he will allow this committee to prepare its comments and markups so that they can prepare their final report at no cost to the city. After they tried to increase the cost as an ad service, and you went along with it, and I said, you don't understand the concept of the contract. They still owe us revisions. And I think you wanted to pay them anyway for the revisions, which they owe us at no additional cost. I don't know why you want to just use taxpayer money to make these changes that are at no cost to us anyway. But these changes were made in consultation with the directors after reviewing all of the facilities and tours that you went on none. And we're ready to move forward. And I actually have.
If you could just show me where in the contract that is.
Mayor, they said publicly, I mean, would you like the transcript of the, I don't know why this is a problem. We all want new facilities. Why are you halting this project?
I'm not.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
asking you where in the contract it says they're supposed to do these, because this is not in the scope. of
They're not supposed to prepare a final report.
They prepare.
They did not prepare a final report. Yeah, so that was not a final report. He backed up his statement and said this is not a final report. After this committee told them they were out of line.
You can go back to the minute.
And if you'd like to start completely over with a reputable architect who will do the study, we're gonna waste time. I think we finally got to a point where we've corrected their mistakes and have something that's buildable and something that's in line with our budget and space requirements.
Okay, well, we have GPD's final report, and then we have some numbers that you are putting forward here verbally. I've asked for these numbers in writing in a form that I can,
Mayor,
But this is not the same as you actually presenting numbers that I can then go back and go over.
all of the numbers are right here.
I
What are
could-
you not seeing?
I could sit down and go to speak.
Okay, well,
I don't have.
yeah, I've got a bunch, I think this is John's hand right.
It's all my hand.
Mr. Ralph, can you
I can
speak
be
with
with-
Mr. Toomey?
I can be with Mr.
and
I've been asking for some of these, what all.
Mayor, I
And-
didn't have a record now.
And I requested that back in December, I got scans of these, this is not what I asked for. And, I wanted to see that before I would have a meeting. And, you call for a meeting without presenting that information, so I didn't have the private off the record, out of the public meeting. I said, here we are in the public, you turned out for me. Because I didn't have the information.
Mayor, we gave you all of the information and I wanted to sit down and explain it to you before the.
Well, as I said, I wanted to have a report from you. This is not a
You would have
report. These are notes. These are notes.
So.
Okay, so these are what the next steps are gonna be. Mr. Rock is gonna meet with Mr. Toomey expeditiously within the next 2 weeks. He will sit down and he will finalize this program. And then Mayor, are you comfortable with this committee starting the RFQ process?
I would need to see, again, I think I've already stated this. I would like you to prepare your own report with regard to the numbers that you are recommending. This is not a report. These are notes.
Mr. Rock is gonna be doing that within the next 2 weeks. A report will then go to you. That report was made by your directors, which you refused to meet with before this meeting. Then, when that
No, I
report,
didn't refuse to meet with my directors. I meet with my directors all the time. I didn't have the meeting that you called for when you didn't give me the report I asked for as a precondition.
I gave you, okay,
This is not. a
this is
report, and I'm
ridiculous.
Talking about making the.
Moving on.
Okay. Mr. Rock is gonna be meeting with Mr. Toomey.
It's clear you're not serious about this, and that's really disappointing.
Also, so there's, you can be forgiven on some levels. You don't understand the process. Still.
But no, all of us here at the table and all of us here on the Zoom and in the audience, have full time jobs. We all have taken the time to go through tours, to talk with our directors, to learn best practices.
We did all the due diligence that should have been done by administration before presenting even a draft. And it was not done.
Great. I'm happy to see, Sherry, where they deviated from the scope of service. You can say whatever you want here on record. Tell me where it is in the scope of services that they haven't met their.
Okay, so DPD had already offered on the record to finalize the report, so we'll take them up on it. They owe it to us.
And for this, thank you so much, Director, for your flexibility and your due diligence and for making all the site visits possible and for revisiting and for just everything you do day to day. And
your
we are looking to the
professionalism.
future with some urgency and hope that will come to fruition sooner than later, so we can put a shovel in the ground within 18 months and not be obstructed from doing so.
Thank you for your professionalism and your patience and your spirit of cooperation.
So the next steps, again, just to reiterate, is Mr. Rock is gonna make an appointment with Mr. Toomey to get a finalized report that will be presented to the mayor. And then we will begin an RFQ process for the owner's rep.
Owner's rep, and we'll work in concert with this committee, that you're all experts in this type of work. We really need to lean on your expertise to write a very good RFQ. And that owner's rep will assist us in hiring an architect of record. With the way I envision this is because of the complexity of this building, I would like to see an architect of record be local. I'd like to see a design architect with the expertise to do fire and police in concert with the architect of record. So it may be that the design engineer is not in town because he's not one of the firms in town to do this type of work. But I'd like to see an architect of record who can be here on boots on the ground during these design meetings, CA, et cetera. So this is something that our owners rep can assist us with. We need expertise to formulate and to prove an interview and a quality owners rep fee that we have.
And just to add on to that, the chiefs both said, in the different communities that we visited, that there are only a few number of safety architects throughout the country. And they have such an agreement and they work so well together that they actually help each other out. So there can be, as Mr. Rock said, a local architect, but they are more than happy to consult, not just with our architect, but with each other around the country, because they all have a vested interest in the safety of all of our police and fire departments. And finally, just to close, I want to state for the record that this city council would like this project to go forward expeditiously. We are not hindering anything. In fact, we would like this, we would like this project to begin, and it can begin with the administration's cooperation within 18 months. This is not something that is, I'm trying to think of the right word. It can be done. This definitely can be done. And, you know, I hope working forward together, we can get this done. So we will have a meeting hopefully within the next 4 weeks. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Before we adjourn, one thing we did discuss, in council regarding city engineering. So we are looking at hiring a city engineer right now. It is current city engineer is not interested in continuing as city engineer instead. Mr. Cheney, who would like his company to be the city engineer, but there's some reluctance among the council to just hire a company to be the city engineer without a full RFQ. Again, like leaning on you guys who are experts in this field of writing RFQs or responding to RFQs to help us put together a really good RFQ for the future of city engineering in this city.
There is a meeting scheduled already.
Say that again?
There is a meeting scheduled
good.
already.
So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, so we will need.
John, if our laws allow it, I'd be curious if we could, you know, first ask engineers who live in the city of University Heights, who pay our taxes, to be considered as city engineers. I don't know if the law allows that, but maybe we can check with our legal counsel. I also want to say, I think you and Michelle gave great counsel in terms of design architect, architect of record, specialists who would pair with, you know, architects of record based on, you know, what we need. I thought that was great counsel.
And to respond to your comment, you know, I'd have to talk with legal counsel about the different rules, but there's something, if it's something that's of importance to you, like location of the engineer, that's something we can put in our metrics on our score sheet. So you could score somebody higher by distance away from City Hall. And that would return a more favorable person who's closer.
That'd be great. Yeah. That'd be great. Look into that if you can, if the city can.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming and we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't.